Okay, everyone, this is my spoiler review of Invincible Season 2, Episode 2. In about 6 hours, I lose my virginity to a fish. It's like they made that title so people like me have to say that title. Before I jump into this review, make sure to hit that sub button and also check out my channel X-Men Trove, where I cover everything X-Men if you're big into superhero stuff. So I'm going to break down my review into 3 parts. We're going to start with everything going on with Mark and Debbie. Then we are going to go into Eve, and then we'll finish off talking about the Guardians and Russ Livingston. What's very interesting about this episode for Mark is they start leaning into hints about him being like his father even more, but they show that with how he treats certain people. But what really gives a payoff in this episode is at the end of the day, when he has a big choice, we'll see with the fish people, is to actually be like Mark and not like his father, which we're going to get into. But I really thought this started to show when he fought Doc Seismic in the beginning. The way they actually visually showed Invincible was very similar to the way Omni-Man would be in his fighting pose flying against his enemy. I do wish, though, in this episode, instead of going back now to season 1 where they use Invincible as the title tag, I thought having last episode end with the tag as Invincible would have been cooler to keep up that the whole season and switch it up, but so be it. But besides the fact of Mark feeling a little more like Omni-Man this episode, in general, you see it's showing how quickly you become an adult being in the superhero business. And the show and story of Invincible does a really good job at that. Like, it's almost inevitable. You see that when he's with his friends at Eve's treehouse and they're all loosening up, enjoying graduating high school, but he's stiff here and he's on call. And that continues on when his mother, Debbie, is wanting him to go on a beach trip to enjoy his last summer, not with all the responsibilities of being an adult, but he's already there. And he knows he can't because he's got to be on call with Cecil. So this is starting to scare Debbie because this is a lot how Omni-Man was to her, which is never around, never available. And she says, I understand why you feel you need to prove yourself. You're a good person. No one thinks you're going to turn out like your father, but that even strikes a nerve with Invincible. Like, why are you even saying that? It's his biggest fear. And this big theme of the show this season is Invincible trying to avoid so much being like his father that he might actually make it come true because he's so scared of it. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it makes it so much more interesting with these variants of Marks we've seen, how many of them went with the side of Omni-Man. I like how they set up right from the start that Debbie's frustrated. The cabinet door is not closing, and then when she's going to sell a home, that the mailbox isn't closing, and then eventually she freaks out on that cabinet, and it's her breaking point. But it's very similar to The Fly with Breaking Bad. There's something just bothering somebody, and that's symbolic of Debbie being not able to deal with what's happened with Omni-Man, and that she's feeling like she's also losing her son to this crazy world of superhero. It's just nagging at her and won't go away. Now, my favorite sequence in this episode is actually with the new Darkwing. So Cecil says there's a sighting of Darkwing, sends Mark on it, and then he goes to Midnight City, which is just this cursed area by this character, Midnight Magician, they said, since '02 he's cursed it. I thought it was cool when we first see Midnight City. There's these Walking Dead like zombies hanging, so that might have been a little nod to Robert Kirkman there. And we learn Nightboy is the new Darkwing, and he used to be his assistant, but Mark's like sidekick, and he's like, we don't use that term, it's degrading. And as much as Mark is teasing him, it's even worse here the other way, where the new Darkwing is hitting his sensitive spots, constantly saying things like, you're a son of a psychopath. Now, this new Darkwing throws him into the Shadowverse, and I love this whole sequence. Mark has the most Omni-Man moment for him yet in this show, where he's holding Darkwing from leaving, and Darkwing's like, you would never, and Invincible says, like you said, I'm Omni-Man's son. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I love this moment, and I love how it's followed up, because he then, when they get out of the Shadowverse, karate chops Darkwing to knock him out. It's a very similar move Omni-Man always used with that karate chop, and Cecil's like, Mark, we lost you for a minute. Where were you? And yes, he's talking about the Shadowverse there, but for us, the audience, we know that means more symbolically that we also lost Mark for a second into that darker side he has from his father. And he even says a very Omni-Man-like line where he's like, you'll have to ask Darkwing's sidekick when he regains consciousness. Now, Debbie comes to see Cecil and is pissed at him that he's putting so much pressure on Mark already, but he's like, I gave you my word, no dangerous stuff from Mark till he's ready, and that he calls the shots. But this will backfire already with Cecil because he sends him later to the fish, and that it is way more dangerous than he had originally thought. But Debbie also notices here that Donald's alive. She saw Donald explode like we did, the audience. So she's reacting the way we all did last episode. Like, what's Donald doing here? So now, we're going to get some kind of clarification on this, and that Debbie's onto it, and that Donald's not even aware of what she's worried about. So whatever they did to Donald, he doesn't even know of, but he's getting more suspicious, as we'll see later on, where he confronts Cecil about Debbie's reaction to him. I also think it was a nice scene where Debbie's trying to sell the home, and she sees this couple. The husband is very commanding to his wife, and she says under her breath, "She's not your pet," alluding to what she felt under Omni-Man and what he had called her, a pet. So that was a nice touch, and it's just a shout out to Sandra. Oh, this whole season she's been a standout playing Debbie. Now, like last episode, we get a couple moments of levity. That's usually been this season when Mark is with Amber to just lighten up things for this very dark season, and Mark takes Amber to lunch, takes her to Paris, but it's really Paris in Vegas, and he says that her skin would rip off if he actually tried to take her to the real Paris. And of course Cecil calls it this moment. So like we see in many superhero shows, that theme of being a superhero takes away from these kind of moments that normal people can usually enjoy without interruption. Now, Cecil informs Mark that he has to go basically marry the queen, who is a widow now, to the king who was murdered by his father. So he's like, I can't marry Fish, I have a girlfriend. And I love when Cecil says all he has to do is kiss the bride, go with the ceremony, etc. And Mark is like, all right, but will I have to, and we know what he's talking about. I thought that was great. And Steven Yeun is so great this episode. He's always amazing, but his voice acting skills are just perfect for this character. He's so good. And I love when he tells the queen, I can't do this, I have a girlfriend, even though you seem super nice, it wouldn't feel right to. And he puts his fingers together. That was so good. And she's like, what? She's like, we abandoned that law and I've run this myself fine. So she's like, trial by combat. So that's when we see it's the depth dweller. Now, what's important is Cecil wants him to retreat, and Mark is about to, but the Death Dweller gets loose and starts killing the fish people. So Mark doesn't want to leave them to die, and Cecil's like, they tried to kill you. And Mark says back, all they wanted was justice for what my dad did. Oh, and he's like, you're not your father, Mark. And he's like, that's why I'm going back. Great writing there. There's our boy. That's the Invincible we know. So I love they added that in with the episode. There's a lot of teases of him being like Omni-Man, but at the end of the day, in big moments, he's deciding to stay true to himself. Now, the problem with Cecil, he's very to the book, so this is going to be tough for Mark because he's still tough on him, even though it worked out great in their favor, because by him saving Atlantis, he saved the queen, and that made things even. And still, Cecil's like, next time I give you an order, you listen. So it's going to be interesting how that goes with Cecil. And Cecil's a very sketchy character, and he's still my favorite. He's such an interesting character. I love learning more and more about him. And I love the final scene in Mark's story here with Debbie and her really crying here. And like I said, Sandra Oh just knocking out of the park this season. And it's interesting when Mark shows up, she pushes him back at first. So there's also a moment where he's scared by this, and there's a fear she has that she's losing his son. And hopefully it doesn't come to a place where he's just reminding her of Omni-Man. So everything with Mark here was really the best part of this episode to me, and really, really strong. And I really like that sequence, like I said, with the new Darkwing. The great people at Diamond Select Toys have sent me another Invincible figure. This one is so cool. This is of Dupli-Kate. And what's sick about this figure, it comes with two different heads, one where she is more angry and one where she is stoic. But what's really awesome about this figure, it comes with different versions of her hands, arms, legs that are destroyed, so it can show versions where she's replicating herself. It's a really fun figure, and I love it comes with an awesome stand, not just a regular stand, but a stand where you can have her floating up or just in a jumping motion and do whatever you want with it. So this is an awesome figure. They make a bunch of Invincibles, so I would definitely check out getting Dupli-Kate. You'll see the link in the description in the comments below. Definitely worth investing in if you love Invincible and you have an awesome character like Dupli-Kate. Now let's jump to everything with Eve. Eve gets much more screen time compared to the premiere this episode, and continues a little bit on from her story and seeing her parents again like we did in the Eve special. But Eve, we know now, is done superheroing, so she's doing things for the community, like she's rebuilding the Chicago scene that Omni-Man destroyed. Now what she'll do is she'll take a rundown area that's been ignored for 6 years and turn it into a community park, helping these families. But we'll learn that the park was unstable, and the dad's like, you're lucky no one was killed. Your powers don't make you a hero, they make you dangerous. So the dad is still an a-hole, and now he's broke, and he's got too much pride to take this golden apple from her, and he works now at a burger mart. The guy still has learned nothing and is still just terrible to his daughter. I'm still kind of curious though where you're going to go with all this story with Eve. It's right now not the most interesting, and it's something we've seen a lot of these kind of stories where them talking about them being dangerous as superheroes. So I want to connect a little more to Mark's story in a way to make this all kind of feel worth it and not just feel like it's just going through the motions. Now, we go to this astronaut, Russ Livingston, who's really a Martian now. He was the one who was taken over last season being on Mars, and we see that he sees on the TV the news is honoring Martian Man, this gentle hero. He's seeing he can do something like this by joining this group, the Guardians, like Martian Man was in. So he'll be the one who's the Shapesmith. And you'll see Shapesmith gives the Guardians a fake superhero generic backstory as we, the audience, are shown visually that this is really Russ Livingston, who was taken over to be a Martian, and he's killing his fellow Martians, and we know his intentions here is to be a Guardian and is probably up to no good. So this is leading to a character who's not going to be trustworthy in the Guardians. Now Cecil teleports to Donald, who informs him the Lizard League is causing mayhem and that the Supreme Lizard's taken over for King Lizard, who Cecil says has been in a prison cell. So he says send in the Guardians. Now, by the end of this episode, they do not leave the Lizard League story. They keep up with that because Supreme Lizard's like, we are not a joke. No matter what social media says, that was a great line. And he gets shot by King Lizard. So the end scene of this episode is leading into knowing King Lizard is coming into play here, leading the Lizard League. I did think it was strange to end on this, though, and didn't end on the nice moment with Mark and Debbie. I thought that would have been a stronger end to the episode than ending on King Lizard. Now we get a great mid-credit scene because you're wondering during this episode 2, where is Angstrom? Because he was a focal point in episode 1. Angstrom is with a Mark variant that lost in his world, and you see Angstrom's just poking at him, wants to know how has this ended up this way. And I love we got to see a female Cecil and Donald in this world, and he just says to make him pay for what he did to your world. So very interesting. It's a very cool concept. And I also like, though, this episode, because of multiverse burnout everywhere, that it wasn't too obsessed with multiverse stuff and people talking about time and where you can be. It was still a very grounded story, which I appreciated. But overall, I'm going to give this episode an 8.7. Same score I did with the premiere. I think they're both equally good. I didn't love it, but I thought it was solid, and I didn't think it was bad either. So very similar thoughts I had to the premiere. So I thought it was just very, very good television, like Invincible usually is. And it's keeping me very interested where this is all going to go. Only 2 more episodes left in this part 1, so I hope these ones really are bangers coming up. But again, I think where the weakness was in this episode was actually with Eve's story here. I just want to see it more tie into the main story and where we're going with it, because right now it's not the most interesting stuff, seeing someone just make the community a better place and change rubble into a park, and her now realizing that she could be a danger. It's just not the most groundbreaking stuff, but we'll see where it goes with that. But I really enjoyed the fish stuff. I really enjoyed everything going on with the new Darkwing and Mark having pieces of his father being shown here and staying as Mark at the end of the day. So let me know what you thought of this episode down below. Make sure to check out my X-Men channel, X-Men Trove, and please subscribe to this channel as well. And I'll see you next time.